Welcome to Talkin' Targaryen. Today we're talking about House of the Dragon Episode 4, King of the Narrow Sea. We did our instant take earlier in the week, but this will be our full recap and analysis. Quick heads up, we're of course going to spoil everything through Episode 4, but no future spoilers. We don't watch the next time on, and neither of us have read Fire and Blood. I'm Gil.
I'm Daniel.
Let's get into it. First, a couple of quick orders of business. Earlier this week, you saw a weird setup. We were recording out of an Airbnb in Toronto. If you're watching this, once again, you see a weird setup. Daniel's back at her home base, but I'm recording out of a hotel. So if at any point you hear us talk over each other or anything, it's because we're recording remotely. And in the year 2022, that technology is yet to be perfected.
It's not because we're mad at each other.
No, though it may also be that. We'll see. The other order of business, this is very exciting. Daniel, I don't know if you've seen the feedback, but people are saying you've really come into your own lately. You're doing a great job on the podcast. And you know what happens when you do a good job? That means it's time for additional responsibilities. So you are all about to witness a real test of Daniel's wit, strength, mental agility, ability to think unilaterally, quadrilaterally. Daniel's going to host today. Now, partially this is because I may not be around for the next instant take. That may be the first video ever on One Take that I'm not a part of. And if I'm not there, we got to see if Daniel can take the proverbial reins. I'm going to get off the dragon. You're going to hop on. We'll see if you can make this baby fly.
A bunch of people just unsubscribed.
And they're like, enough with the metaphors already. With that, Daniel, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to hand over the baton starting now.
All right. So we open with Rhaenyra is on her tour through Westeros seeking a candidate for marriage. She's hearing proposals from tons of people, first from Lord Dondarrion of House Blackhaven. Now, his castle is well defended against Dornish incursions. Don't forget that. But Rhaenyra mocks him for how much older he is than her. Then a young boy from House Blackwood proposes to her. He's mocked by Amos Bracken of House Bracken, which leads to a sword fight. And Rhaenyra's like, hey, let's get out of here. So as she walks away, the young boy slays Amos. And Rhaenyra decides to cut her tour early. Gil, what did you think of the opening?
A couple things. One, every time we talk about this show, you have to give that caveat. We're looking through this, through the moral lens of that time and place. But I kind of love the fact that Rhaenyra doesn't bother with that. She's like, this guy's old enough to be my grandfather. You're putting a child in front of me to potentially marry. She cuts through all the BS. And there's something satisfying about seeing her just not care about tradition and say, can we stop being idiots and do this in a way that makes sense? Kind of gets you on her side, and it's admirable. More and more I've been finding myself connecting with her character, and in many ways, by doing that, she becomes sort of the audience surrogate. And I think that's part of what's connected me to her, and then of course all the struggles she's been going through last episode and this episode.
It did connect me with her more as well, but there's also we're seeing more and more of like a rough edge to Rhaenyra, right? Like the young boy comes up there and like he immediately mocks him too. She immediately mocks him. She's like, and now a boy. And I felt bad for the kid, right? And then she also like doesn't really try hard to stop the violence, right? So there's also a level of callousness there that I think we're starting to see more and more of.
Yeah, you do see that kid was so nervous, and he was like getting himself mentally prepared to give a speech he's probably practiced 100 times. And he is just trying to look as confident as possible. He's trying to be a man. And it's all led up to this moment only to be somewhat mocked by Rhaenyra. I will say, though, I did see a slight smile on her face when the kid starts giving his speech, which I think was her feeling sort of impressed by him, kind of her way of subtly saying, good job, kid. And then when it devolves into violence, can you really blame her? She's been surrounded by these guys just senselessly killing each other ever since that tourney in episode 1. What are you going to do? If these people want to slaughter each other, go ahead. I will say, if it was the kid who got killed, I would have felt a lot worse after this scene.
Yeah, but even the other guy also is pretty young. But also the guy Amos Bracken, he yells at the kid and calls him a c word, and then Rhaenyra goes, "I could start to like this man," and so like Rhaenyra also I don't know, she seemed like she kind of liked that part of it.
By the way,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I love doing this remotely. It's awesome. Now, I was going to bring up a little bit of cool lore that gets mentioned here. The Blackwoods, an ancient house descended from the first men. There's that line, the blood of the first men still flow in their veins. And that got me curious. I was like, how much do we know about the origins of this world? And apparently the first men were one of 3 ethnic groups that were around very long time ago. They were the ones who first set foot on Westeros, back when Westeros was only occupied by children of the forest and the giants. So just a cool little piece of lore that gets brought up here.
Giants. I was not aware of giants.
You remember the giants. They fought in a couple of the battles. There were so few of them left. They weren't like that giant. They were more like really, really big people, like unnaturally large. But it's not like they could crush you under one foot.
Cool. And the other bit of lore is that the Blackwoods and the Brackens also have a long-going family rivalry for generations. And so this violence between the two families also wasn't like super unexpected, and not necessarily only because of Rhaenyra. There's a bit of a feud, but certainly, she kind of stirred the pot inadvertently.
You put a Bracken and a Blackwood in the same room together, what do you think's going to happen? Come on.
So, Rhaenyra is on her way back to King's Landing. She's ended her tour across Westeros very early without finding a husband. And she ponders with Cole over, how is her father going to take ending the tour? And then Daemon's dragon flies by her ship, almost like capsizing the ship. And Rhaenyra seems excited to see Daemon upon her return to King's Landing.
Yeah, for the handful of crossover fans we have from Saulcast, these moments give me such Kim Wexler vibes, where everybody is annoyed and frustrated by Daemon's antics, but she always has that little smile. She so appreciates that flagrant disregard for just the face that people always put on. He's going to ride his dragon in recklessly and just not give a crap about anybody else. And based on the fact that she in her entire life has felt forced into certain roles and responsibilities, that kind of disregard, she appreciates that. I think that's what that smile, and she's excited to see Daemon, but I think that's kind of the core of where that amusement comes from.
Yeah, I love the way Rhaenyra always smiles at Daemon's antics. So, Rhaenyra rushes into the throne room along a big crowd of people rushing into it, and we hear whispers everywhere. People whisper, "It's Daemon fighting in the Stepstones." Bunch of whispering. Everyone gathers in the throne room. Daemon walks in wearing a crown and wielding a hammer, and he's stopped by a blade held by a king's guardsman as he approaches the throne. Daemon drops the hammer and declares, "Add it to the chair," in the tradition of previous conquerors. Viserys and Daemon speak with each other. Viserys asks, "You wear a crown. Do you also call yourself king?" Daemon responds, "Once we smashed the Triarchy, they named me king of the Narrow Sea." Gasps all around. "But I know there is only one king, your grace." And Daemon kneels down to Viserys. Viserys orders Daemon to rise, embraces him to cheers. And unlike Daemon, we also learn that Corlys has sailed home to Driftmark and is not paying fealty to Viserys.
Yeah, I love this scene. I mean, first, I love Daemon's swagger. This is him at like his most swaggiest.
Yeah.
He's got a blade against his chest. I always love that in movies where someone puts a gun up to someone's head and they just keep walking forward. I know you're not going to do it. So Daemon is just so badass, and the way he just throws a sword and he's like, "Add it to the throne."
So another example of just how badass Daemon is. Viserys asks him who holds the Stepstones. Daemon responds, "The tides, the crabs, and 2,000 dead Triarchy corsairs staked to the sand to warn those that might follow." One of the most badass lines.
So once again, Rhaenyra is an audience surrogate because you've got a big grin on your face, and so does she. And then it goes from Daemon's swagger to something we really haven't seen. I don't know that we've seen this at all this series. We've theoretically heard that at one point Viserys and Daemon were close like brothers. Now for a moment, we actually see it. We see them reunite, and the music swells. We know this is a happy moment, genuine happy moment between two brothers. But not even knowing where it's going to go in that moment, I just know it's not going to last. So I feel great seeing the two of them together, reunited, and also have that. I mean, every moment of happiness on Game of Thrones always has a dark cloud hanging over it because you know it's probably not going to last. But in that moment, it felt really good.
And there are a lot of details in like character development in this show that I really like. One of the little bits here was when Viserys embraces Daemon. Daemon like leans into the hug. Like, I love that. Like, he leans in with his head against his shoulder because we just know, or at least we've suspected, right, that Daemon has just been longing to feel accepted by his brother for so long. And I feel like we really feel it in this scene.
Yeah, there's definitely a swirling question over what does Daemon really want. And you and I have been saying a large part of it is acceptance and validation from his older brother. And I think this is a small moment that sort of backs that up. He leans into the hug. This is something that he was after.
Yeah. And then there's also a few interesting other interactions in this scene. So Otto and Daemon share a look with each other as Viserys takes the crown from Daemon. Right, we know we're sort of rekindling that rivalry again, and Otto's always very suspicious. And then Viserys and Otto also share a look as Daemon kneels. Right, they're all looking at each other, wondering like, all right, what's going on here?
I love the looks between characters on this
Yes.
show. It's such a fun aspect of the show. One of the rivalries I really miss from the first episode is Otto and Daemon, when they were actually in the same room together in the small council and they snipe at each other. So if all we get is a look between them, I'll take it.
All right, Daemon's back. It's time to party. So Viserys and Daemon reminisce about old times. Alicent is hanging out there too. She suggests that Daemon may want to see the new tapestries. Viserys mocks her, says he has no interest in such things. They all
He
laugh.
has no interest in such things.
And then Rhaenyra feels awkward in the conversation. She misses Daemon. Viserys not happy with her, so she excludes herself, and Alicent follows.
Question.
Yes.
Why do you think Rhaenyra kind of excused herself to go be alone?
I think it's just the awkwardness of, I think she misses Daemon and wants to feel that connection with him, but there's so much distance between her and her father right now, and she's not even spoken with him about sort of this big thing she did of ending her tour. And so I think she feels excluded from that ability to connect with Daemon here. And I think the fact that Daemon is so chummy with Viserys makes her feel like she just personally feels excluded. And so she just kind of wants to separate herself from the whole situation.
So I think it might be a little bit of that, but also I definitely think she wants to get out of that situation. I do think it's uncomfortable. I do also think she wanted to spend time alone with Alicent specifically. Alicent was the one offering to show the textiles. And so I think Rhaenyra was hoping if she says, I'd like to see them, she could go off alone with Alicent. But Viserys kind of shuts that down by saying directly to Rhaenyra, don't deprive yourself then. Essentially, then go by yourself. Alicent's going to stay by her husband's side.
I think that completely makes sense. And then, of course, Alicent does follow Rhaenyra, and we see a pretty intimate conversation between them. And so I think you're right. Clearly, Rhaenyra wanted that. Alicent romanticizes Rhaenyra's tour, saying, it must be so romantic, right, to be receiving all these suitors from all across Westeros. Rhaenyra responds, how romantic it must be to get imprisoned in a castle and made to squeeze out heirs. And Alicent winces. Of course, that's essentially her situation. Rhaenyra apologizes, and then they both declare to each other how much they've missed each other. And we feel once again that intimate connection between the two of them that we haven't felt in a long time.
Yeah, I think we further understand, I think intellectually we understood Alicent's plight up until now, but in this episode we truly feel it. We spend a little bit of time alone with her, and we'll get to this scene later, but when she's sitting alone in her bed chambers and in the middle of the night is called over to Viserys, it's gross, and you feel awful for her. And you feel awful for her in this moment when Rhaenyra so plainly and callously describes Alicent's situation. By making us understand Alicent's plight, it's character development for her, but it also further makes us fear that future for Rhaenyra. So it also further connects us with her and understand why she so rallies against this fate that her father and the entire realm want for her. She doesn't want to become Alicent. And it adds that layer of tragedy to their friendship. We haven't really seen the two of them get to spend much time together since episode 1. And here, kind of like Viserys and Daemon together, we see Alicent and Rhaenyra together briefly, where they miss each other, and right now the dynamic in their relationship has been so turned on its head. Alicent talks here about how I'd like to believe I'm still the Lady Alicent, but all anyone sees when they look at me now is the Queen. On the Instant Take, you and I talked about how these roles that you're assigned in this realm, they end up swallowing you. And Alicent is disappearing. She's turning into the Queen. So in a sense, Rhaenyra is telling her friend that she misses her. And in a sense, her friend is gone. Alicent is there, but she's fading away.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting that they're able to still share this moment of intimacy, right? Even if it's not going to last. I was wondering, okay, why now? Why now are they reconnecting for the first time in a long time? I think that's also a sign of Rhaenyra maturing. Or Rhaenyra is now starting to understand that, look, Alicent's just doing her duty. Or I think maybe she's also overcome the trauma, right, of initially what happened. But now I think Rhaenyra, look, she's trying to find a husband. She's starting to understand the issue, I think, of duty in Westeros better. And now she may still reject it, right? But I think she's understanding it. And that's also allowing her to connect with Alicent, or, the queen persona that Alicent has had to take on.
Right. Rhaenyra is staving off the pressure, but the more she feels it, the more she can understand how Alicent ended up where she is.
And last thought there, too, is I love this theme of duty and desire, right? Duty versus desire we keep seeing. This idea of the Lady Alicent versus the Queen, just such a literal rendering of that concept.
It's also very true to life. So I've heard celebrities talk about the fact that there is the person and then the persona. There's a public, a celebrity can talk about themselves in the third person, and it's not weird because when they do that, they are talking about the celebrity persona that's in the public eye, as opposed to their internal life that we're not privy to. I do that all the time.
Yeah.
I had a really embarrassing moment, literally right before we recorded, because I was out to lunch at a restaurant here, and the waiter's like, "Dude, you look so familiar. Where do I know you from?" And I was like, "Well, do you watch YouTube?" And he's like, "No, I don't." And then I was like, "Oh, wait, have you ever seen New Girl?" And he's like, "Yes, you look like Schmidt from New Girl." I thought he was recognizing me off the channel. I was about to be like, "Do you watch Better Call Saul or Dark?" But yeah, he just thought I looked like Schmidt from New Girl, which is something I get a lot.
All right. Well, Rhaenyra finally gets the reunion she wants with Daemon. They have a very interesting conversation, mostly in High Valyrian. Let's see. Oh, I didn't really summarize this part. All right. Basically.
Wow. Look at this. Your first time recapping.
All right. Basically, here's what they talk about. Basically, Rhaenyra's like, "Hey, what are you doing here? Surely there's more to your return than taunting my father." Daemon smirks. He's entertained by her, and he touches her necklace. So we see some intimacy there of, you're
the
still
necklace
wearing
he
my
gave
necklace.
her. Right.
Yes. And Daemon comments bit awkward thing to say to a young woman. "You've matured yourself these last 4 years." And we're also reminded that it's been 4 years since the two of them have last seen each other.
Right. Actually, though, most episodes, when they want to tell you how much time has passed, there'll be 7 reminders throughout the episode. 3 years, huh? Wow, 3 years. I can't believe it. Here, I think this was the only mention.
Yeah, I think it was. Interesting. And it's not even 4 years since the last episode, right? It's 4 years since the two of them saw each other. So, wow, they even let us do the math. Interesting.
Yeah, about 1 year since the last episode.
So Rhaenyra starts to complain to Daemon about her predicament, right? That she's going to be sold off to a lord for the largest castle, perhaps one well protected from Dornish incursions. Daemon explains to her, look, marriage is just a political arrangement. Rhaenyra says that may be true for men. For men, marriage, it might be a political arrangement. For women, it is like a death sentence. reminiscing, of course, about her mother, but also the way people, women can get locked up in a castle and forced to make heirs. Daemon tells her you cannot live in fear, or you cannot live life in fear, or you will forsake the best parts of it. Rhaenyra says, I have no desire to live in fear, only solitude. Daemon responds, such a lonely prospect, with a smile.
Now, that was an interesting line to me, because she says she wants to live only in solitude, which is an odd thing to say for someone who wants to be the heir to the throne, right?
Yeah, I'm also not even really sure we've seen that Rhaenyra loves solitude so much. Maybe she's been driven to it a bit. I could see that.
To me, it came off as a pretty reactionary thing to say, similar to in episode 1 where Alicent asks Rhaenyra what she wants, and she's like, I want to fly around on a dragon and eat only cake. I think that at this point, she's just so suffocated by politics and duty that at this point, she's like, forget the throne. Just leave me alone. She's kind of wavering on the whole, I'm going to change the order of things thing. And she's saying, I don't want to be part of this realm. This place is awful. So I think this is a momentary lapse in just her principles.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think it's like she just got back from a vacation that she had to spend surrounded by annoying people for months. And she's like, just leave me alone.
Yeah. I also think an interesting moment that you mentioned, but when Rhaenyra asks Daemon why he came back, and all he does is look at her and grab her necklace, I believe that's him silently saying, I came back for you, right? And at the end of the episode, when he says to Viserys, marry me to Rhaenyra, let me marry Rhaenyra, that's why he came back, right? I think that was his plan all along.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think also, I do think he probably wanted to reunite with his brother. Right? But I think you're right. I think Rhaenyra was a really big part of it.
Yeah.
And of course, the other context here not to forget, right? When Daemon talks about how marriage is a political concept, right? He hasn't seen his wife probably in years, right? And he trash talks her a lot. And of course, Daemon has the luxury of that. Whereas, Rhaenyra, if she marries somebody, we don't know if she'd be able to get the same type of arrangement that Daemon has.
Right. When Rhaenyra calls marriage a death sentence, he's like, I wish my wife was dead. It's awful.
Well, and she also says, well, how lucky your wife is, you haven't put a baby in her. And he says something about how I don't know that a child could grow in such a cold environment, something like that.
A couple of other things in the scene. He says it's a tragic world, and that's almost the in-universe version of looking at this time, through their moral lens. That's him basically saying there are some awful things you just have to accept about this world that are unchangeable. And I think that theme runs throughout the episode, because later Viserys says to Rhaenyra, everyone on my small council, everybody who requests a meeting with me, they've all been self-interested. Again, that's an awful thing about this reality you just have to accept. And then the other thing, you already mentioned it, but the idea of marriage as a political arrangement, and then extending that to the idea of all of this being a political arrangement, basically telling Rhaenyra, you can do things to satisfy the realm, go along with what they want, but have your own private life where you can still take what you want. I think both of those things are important in forming Rhaenyra and inform some of the decisions she makes at the end of the episode, and I assume future decisions she's going to make.
Yeah. We get back to the small council, where Rhaenyra now has a seat. She is no longer the cupbearer. The stepstones were meant to be one for the realm, but over the past few days, it seems we have traded a crab feeder for a sea snake. Lionel Strong explains that Corlys is still insulted by Viserys' refusal of marriage to his daughter several years earlier. And then Otto shares the news that Corlys is in negotiations with the Sea Lord of Braavos, one of the free cities, intending to wed his daughter Laena to the Sea Lord's son. He explains that if House Valyrian entered into an alliance with the free cities, then they would have to seek their own marriage pact, and all eyes move over to Rhaenyra, who, even though she's sitting at the small council, she's still somebody who might need to be pawned off for a political marriage.
Even Viserys isn't above marrying for political arrangements, all right? Well, apparently he is, I guess, based on who he married. But yeah, the only thing about this scene that struck me is very bold. Corlys is so bold here, where he's flagrantly, essentially building an alliance and an army outside of the king's purview. And I don't know, just more and more I look at Viserys as you're just not a good king. All these people are moving against you, and just what are you going to do about it? And later he does something. He makes a smart decision later in the episode, but like by the skin of his teeth, he makes a smart decision.
Yeah, I mean, clearly House Valerian is very, very strong, and House Targaryen is just not that powerful anymore. Or at least people don't think they're powerful, right? Because Corlys is willing to, yeah, I mean, do things that seem downright treasonous.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I was wondering, the start of the scene, they say that they've traded a crab feeder for a sea snake. That's before the news was even shared about House Valerian entering into alliance with Sea Lord of Braavos. So what had Corlys already done? Was that based purely on him not showing up to pay fealty? Or is there like other news about Corlys we didn't get?
Who knows? Maybe it's one of those meetings where, yes, it's revealed in the meeting, but everyone kind of already knew going in what they were going to talk about. Whispers in the hallways.
You know how sometimes they prep the CEO ahead of a meeting? Like they give him all the news? Yeah, maybe they already shared the minutes, so everybody already knew it.
Yeah,
I mean, how else could you be ready with such a nice line, like trading a crab feeder for a sea snake? You must have gotten the notes ahead of time.
But are they still putting those little marbles on the table, by the way? I feel like they drew such attention to it in the first episode, and if they're still doing it, I'm just no longer noticing it. I'm going to have to rewatch this again.
We've just gotten so used to it. It's how like in modern day, you sit down and you put your phone on the table. We just don't even notice it anymore. Yeah. Okay. Night falls. We see Rhaenyra.
By the way, that's what I wrote in my notes as well.
I saw you write that and it got stuck in my head. Oh. So we see interspersed with each other Rhaenyra and Daemon going on an adventure, and Viserys and Alicent spending an evening together as well. So first on Rhaenyra and Daemon. While Alicent is home taking care of her baby, I put that in my notes. I don't know if it's that relevant. Anyway, Alicent's taking care of her baby, but Rhaenyra...
I think it's relevant because she's stuck in her chambers taking care of this kid, while Rhaenyra still has some freedom and gets to go out and have a good time.
That's right. And there's a lot of juxtaposition between the two lives. So Rhaenyra finds in her room clothes, like common person clothing, and a map that leads her through a secret door in her bedroom, through secret corridors, where she gets outside King's Landing and meets Daemon, who then takes her on a tour of the city after dark. And there's a lot of weird stuff going on, like people juggling and blowing fire, all the types of things, you see on an evening out on the town.
Weird things. And the number one thing, you're like, people juggling.
Oh, there's a guy walking on a tightrope, holding that like stick thing to balance.
Which it felt like nobody was even watching him. So it's like, who's the audience for that? Just in case someone looks up, look, I'm walking on a tightrope.
Also, the other thing that was funny was, so when people walk on a tightrope, they hold the stick because it helps them balance, because they can adjust the weight of the stick in one direction or another. The ends of his stick were on fire. Like, just why?
He wasn't even doing it for fun. This was a punishment. Like, someone pushed him onto that rope.
So then they go to a play where they're basically in the play, they're mocking the question of who's going to end up on the Iron Throne, Daemon, Rhaenyra, or Aegon. And the crowd basically cheers against Rhaenyra, mainly because she's a woman and because she doesn't have a conqueror's name like Aegon.
I thought you were going to say something else. She doesn't have starts with the same two letters. I got to say, by the way, that play sucked. Can you imagine if that was peak entertainment? Like, that's what we had to podcast about? Like, when he pulled the rope out of his pants, it was great.
I love the character development at that point. I just got
to say on that play, this is rare exposure to the common people for Rhaenyra. And I wonder how it's going to affect her worldview or the way that she views the people that she may ultimately represent. Because you got to think you walk away from this with a lot of disdain in your heart. And you see her starting to quote Cole here. In the last episode, she asked, do you think that the people will ever accept me as queen or as heir? And he says they won't have any choice. And here, Daemon tells Rhaenyra, Many of these people do not, they want to see Aegon as the heir. And Rhaenyra says their wants are of no consequence. That's basically a paraphrase of what Cole said. So I do worry here that she's forming some kind of disdain for the people, and who cares what they want? They got to, my way or the highway.
Yeah, exactly. I also love, though, in that scene, as the audience is or as the play is like mocking Rhaenyra, Rhaenyra starts going, boo, boo,
Yeah.
lies, slander.
We see such a playful side to Rhaenyra this episode here and in the scene with Cole where she's being flirtatious. It's so nice to see her kind of cut loose and actually enjoy herself. At the moment where she's like, he called me boy, and just how much fun she was having. I also just wanted to pat Sir Harwin on the back. What a great guy when he plays into her fantasy and he's like, run along now, boy. I mean, as heartwarming a scene as you can have just in the bowels of Westeros where all these just dark, depraved things are happening.
And hold on to that word bowels. We'll come back to that later in this episode. After the play, Rhaenyra, like, she sort of steals something, like some food. I don't know that she even really steals it. She, like, picks it up and then throws it at the guy, right? Or does she take it with her? I couldn't figure it out.
Well, Daemon prompts it, like, you got to pay for that.
Yeah.
I think he was kicking off this fantasy of you're a street rat. So she just plays into it. And, yeah, I think she threw it and then ran off.
Anyway, she runs off, and Daemon yells, I'll catch her. And that's when Sir Harwin runs into her and lets her run off, continuing to pretend to be a boy. Then Daemon takes Rhaenyra into a pleasure house. Rhaenyra looks cautious, but eager, like she's excited to be looking around. And they've
first,
also...
You might be about to say this, but he took her hat off.
Yes. So they were disguised before, right? They were at least she was wearing a hat, Daemon was wearing a hood. They've removed both of those. And eyes are all on them. Everybody sees these two Targaryens, both people who some think could end up on the Iron Throne, both of them walking through a pleasure house together. Daemon, there's some intense dialogue between the two of them, and then Daemon makes a move on Rhaenyra. In fact, Daemon leans in to kiss Rhaenyra, but he only goes 90%. Rhaenyra leans in the other 10% and starts to kiss him. I rewatched that scene multiple times to confirm I accurately described it. And they start making out, and Daemon then starts to back away from her, and then he sort of hits the wall behind her, frustrated, and leaves. And Rhaenyra is left in this pleasure house alone, standing there with her like pants on the ground, like half naked.
Yeah, so many things to say about this scene. First, just aesthetically, with the loud score and the way the camera is cutting away from Rhaenyra and Daemon and then back to them, just the overwhelming of the senses really put you in that place with them. I also love how, again, it's cutting back and forth between them and some of the bystanders. And you're like, wait a minute, were they kind of moving closer to each other? For a few seconds, you're like, wait a minute, is this going where I think it's going? And then it does. And I was trying to pay attention to when does Daemon make the decision to not go through with this? And at first, she's facing away from him. And then when she turns around to kiss him, they make eye contact, and that's when he stops. So the way I read that is he has a couple of motivations here. One, he came to town hoping to marry Rhaenyra. And I think part of what he's doing here is making this public display so people will see them. It will be this shameful act. But a way to defend against it is, hey, everyone, it's not weird. They're getting married. So he's trying to back Viserys into a corner so he'll accept his proposal later. At the same time, I do think he has genuine affection for her. And when he sees her and he looks into her eyes, he thinks, I want to go through with this, but he has essentially a crisis of decency. This is not the place to do it, in this dank, disgusting pleasure house.
Yeah, I think there's another element too, which is he's also not used to, like, he actually really likes Rhaenyra and has a lot of emotional intimacy with her, and he's also not used to sleeping with people that he has like emotional intimacy with. And
True.
right, that's partly why it was sort of easier for him when she was turned around and he wasn't looking her in the eyes.
Exactly. And I know people will point out that we've seen Daemon have trouble in the past, and so this might just be another case of that. But my read on that first time and on the second time is that yes, he's having difficulty, but it's coming from a psychological place. Like, I don't think he has a physical, what's the word?
He's a healthy adult, right? His issue, I agree. It seems like all the issues are psychological, but they manifest physically.
Yeah, impotence. I don't think it's a physical ailment. I think it's a psychological issue, and here it's brought on by this is not the right place to be intimate with Rhaenyra. By the way, also the music, the way the percussion starts every time Rhaenyra goes for the kiss, and then it stops when he backs away, and then it starts again. It makes us feel almost like a choreographed like dance or something. And also the intense strings in between the percussion makes it feel so intense and unsettling. It kind of just perfectly captured the entire vibe of this scene.
Yeah, I thought it was really well done. The other thing too, just what an asshole Daemon is. Like, he leaves her. This is like her first time, probably, like outside the castle, and he leaves her in the middle of a pleasure house alone, like stripped half naked. And this is like her first sexual experience. Like, what an asshole. Like, real jerk.
It's like if you're an experienced drinker and you take someone out like for their first beverage, it's kind of on you to stick with them and sort of babysit them through the evening. This is if you abandon someone, this is like that, but times 100.
That was really brutal. But the other thing I think that comes out here too is how strong of like a character and personality Rhaenyra has. Right? I think it's really interesting that she takes a pretty active role in this whole thing, right? Which is pretty interesting, right? She's like fairly aggressive on trying to get Daemon to sort of continue. And I think that's kind of shocking in a way, but also not that surprising because we see Rhaenyra as like a fairly dominant, strong, independent person. And then the other thing too is, yeah, she's left in this like ridiculously bad situation, but it doesn't really seem to bother her that much. And we'll sort of see where it goes next. But
right.
she maintains
you would expect her to leave this, and maybe we find her crying in her bedchamber because she feels rejected. You know, what did I do wrong? Like, why did he leave me there? But not at all. Like, she seems to have pulled herself together. Not that she even fell apart. She just seems fine.
Well, and I think by now, I think we would expect that for maybe a different character, but from Rhaenyra, I don't think we expect that. I think we've now gotten to know who she is well enough that, it's not really surprising.
Right. If anyone's crying after this, it's Daemon.
Yes, that's true. And we'll see. He has a pretty bad day after. So meanwhile, right, while all of this is happening, Viserys and Alicent are spending some time together. We see a pretty sort of vulnerable scene where Viserys is in the bath, all this staff taking care of him, and Alicent kicks everyone out to leave herself alone with Viserys and starts to help take care of him. And by the way, now we can also really clearly see that he's missing fingers, right, if we haven't mentioned that before. Viserys is not looking very good, not very healthy. And then later on, Alicent is alone in her own chambers, but the staff come to her to tell her, the king wishes to see you. It's late, she responds. Doesn't matter. She doesn't have a choice. She's brought to Viserys' chambers, and they sleep together. Viserys is like, Alicent looks very uninterested, and Viserys is on top of her, and his body is just like covered in lesions, and he looks, he does not look good, and Alicent does not look happy. And then later on, we see Alicent lying in bed after, next to a sleeping Viserys, and she's anxiously picking at her fingernails, which we hadn't seen in a little while.
Yeah, a few thoughts here. One of them I already mentioned earlier, but I said that this episode really puts you with Alicent, and although we understood her plight intellectually, you really feel it. It's hard not to watch that scene with her and Viserys and not feel disgusted and feel awful for her, and kind of have a hard time viewing Viserys with a lot of empathy or sympathy after that scene because of what he's doing to her. And in his mind, he would say, I'm not doing anything wrong. Like, this is what is expected of me. It's what's expected of her. This is the way of the realm. And in fact, we haven't been with Viserys all that much. He kind of came across as a protagonist in the first couple of episodes where we were more with him than Rhaenyra. And I think we're starting to shift POVs a little bit. Also, seeing all the lesions on his back. You know, what I said earlier about your role in this world and your duties, sort of swallow you up, and you see Viserys is being disintegrated by the actual Iron Throne. Being king is destroying him. And maybe your duties and your role, it doesn't do that to everyone. Maybe it takes a certain type of person, someone strong enough to withstand it, and maybe that's Rhaenyra.
Yeah. So, Rhaenyra returns to her chambers from the pleasure house. She playfully steals Criston Cole's helmet, who's guarding the door, lures him inside, and then closes the door behind the two of them and kisses him. She then undresses Criston without him putting up too much of a fight. And then eventually he starts to help as well. And they both start getting undressed together. Then Criston Cole takes a deep, nervous breath, and then they start to kiss some more. And then they sleep together. Gil, reactions?
In the first non-tasteless sex scene in Game of Thrones history. Purely consensual on both sides. It's not on a child's corpse like it was with, what's his name? The knight that got his hand cut off. And the queen, like the two main characters.
Oh, Jamie and Cersei. Oh man, I forgot. That was so messed up. That was nuts.
Yeah. So mixed emotions, though. I mean, this took up a lot of our instant take earlier in the week, so I won't go on too much. But just mixed emotions because on the one hand, Rhaenyra took the lesson from Daemon. She's taking matters into her own hands, and she's going to be with somebody, at least for this night, somebody she actually wants to be with. At the same time, this is going to have consequences. Rhaenyra is willing to take on those consequences, I think. But what could happen to Cole? If people found out about this, I mean, he could be put to death. So
he would be put to death, right? I think if people found out about it.
Yeah. So I felt very, very mixed in this scene. I don't know. What about you, Daniel?
Yeah. Well, so for one, right, like the music felt very melancholy and sad in this scene. Right. And that is like, I think that's kind of how I felt during most of the scene too. Right. Because it just fills me with this sense of dread of like, this is not going to be good. Mostly like I was mostly worried for Criston Cole. Right. That was one thing I was wondering, like, why do you think he goes through with it? Right. Like, I'm sure you can think of a lot of reasons why. Right. But it is such an insane risk. Right. Like it's not unreasonable to think he could get killed for this.
You have to take a vow. Do you have to take a vow of celibacy?
So I know they can't get married. I think they even do take a vow of celibacy as well.
They got to stop with that. I just think those vows they never work out. Because I think that's part of the problem, is that he's jonesing. He's
I was going to
desperate.
say, don't you think he'd be a little nervous performing for like the princess when he's maybe also been celibate for like, it would have been if he's kept to his vows, which by the way, a lot of the Kingsguard don't keep to their vows. And there are other stories of that happening. But it's been like, if he's kept his vows, it's like 4 years.
Yeah. But that also might be part of it, is that it is the princess and it's hard to say no to her with anything she wants.
I think, yeah. There's got to be some element too of like fear of not doing what the princess wants, but I gotta imagine that's probably a small part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. We should also say, by the way, I don't think it's purely a physical attraction. We haven't seen a lot of the two of them together, but whenever we do, we see them open up to each other in a way that we don't really see with anyone else. From Rhaenyra's perspective, when she's been totally alone, she can't really speak to Alicent the way she used to. Daemon's not around, and things are awkward between them. Cole was kind of the only person she could speak to. So we don't see a lot of them together, but you can fully understand how they can grow to kind of admire each other.
Yeah, no, there is a very genuine, real emotional connection between the two of them. And we see it at the beginning of this episode too, right? She's confiding in him of, hey, how's my dad going to react to me canceling the tour? Right? Like they're speaking way more personally with each other than she is with anybody else.
And it's all done silently too. I mean, Cole says a few words like, no, we shouldn't. But Rhaenyra, this whole scene is played, she doesn't say anything. But I just love the acting here. She shows us a side of Rhaenyra we haven't seen before. Like I said earlier, this kind of playful, flirtatious side, and it felt very genuine and really well done, I thought.
Anyway, news travels really fast in Westeros. So immediately after this, Otto is called to like the gate where he meets with a messenger from the White Worm, who is later revealed to be Mysaria, Daemon's previous mistress. And we later learn that that message is that Daemon and Rhaenyra were spotted in a pleasure house together.
Yeah, and I love the way Viserys, he's like, say it. Just say it plainly. And finally, Otto uses the word coupling.
Yeah, well, so then let's go through that scene as well. So Otto tells Viserys that Rhaenyra was seen coupling with Daemon in the bowels of a pleasure house. And this conversation is just brutal, of like Viserys like pulling it out of him. And Viserys refuses to believe it. He insists it's a lie, and then he accuses Otto. He first insists it's a lie, but then I think he starts to believe it because Otto shows that, look, I've had other people corroborate the story. And then he accuses Otto of intentionally capitalizing on this opportunity to destroy Rhaenyra's reputation and to get his own blood on the throne. Viserys says, "Are you so sick with ambition that you would have my daughter stalked, spied upon, awaiting your best chance to destroy her reputation? You think yourself a cunning man. Your designs are obvious. Do you wish to have your blood on the Iron Throne so badly that you are willing to destroy mine own? Just get out. Leave me at once."
Yeah, great scene. And I love how it's preceded by a quick scene of Otto psyching himself up. You can see how nervous he is and how intense he looks because he knows he's about to do something really difficult that probably won't go very well. And honestly, by the end of the scene, I think you could still say well played by Otto because he isn't fired at that point. And Viserys blows up at him, but I don't think I don't think he sees the big picture yet. It's still very emotional and reactionary. You know, you're ambitious. You're trying to take the Iron Throne. But until Rhaenyra spells it out for him later in the episode, I think that's where an emotional, reactionary idea becomes an intellectual one, where he says, wait a minute, yes, that wasn't just an outburst from me. He truly is pulling strings here, and I can't trust him.
Yeah, I mean, this scene was so tense. And I also love the way that like we see Otto psyching himself up. Both of us, I think, when we first saw this scene, we really thought Otto was pissing. Like the way, do you remember the camera's really close up on him? He's kind of grimacing a little bit, and the sound of the fire really sounds like running water.
It looks like he's at a urinal. Yeah, I wasn't going to bring it up, but like honestly, rewatch the scene with that in mind. And because I was thinking it, and then he kind of closes his eyes and sighs, and
it's like the Yanny Laurel thing. You hear whatever you're expecting. So go rewatch that scene, expecting that he's just standing at a Westeros urinal, and you'll see what we're talking about. And
then thank us later.
The other thing in this scene was we again get like a really good look at Viserys's like missing fingers. And I just got the impression, or maybe I'm only noticing it at certain times, but I feel like they're showing this like the gnarliness of his body at like opportune times. And here to me it sort of signified his weakness, but also like the weakness of House Targaryen, or at least how his weakness is linked to these family issues, right? That again, Otto being able to drive this divide between Viserys and Rhaenyra weakens House Targaryen.
And I think it's a visual representation of that theme. He is not fit to be king, and he is literally his body is being destroyed because he can't handle that role.
Yeah. So moving on to the next scene, we see Daemon wake up in Mysaria's inn. And so this is where it's revealed that Mysaria is the White Worm. And we learn that because basically Mysaria explains, like, look, I've gotten past, I'm no longer a prostitute. Now I have my own business. It seems like she's got this in. But we also see the messenger boy, the one who spotted Daemon and Rhaenyra. We see him return to give Mysaria some coins. So clearly he's in her employ. And she's basically become like the Lord Varys, right? The master of spies or whisperers, whatever they called him. But, in this era of Westeros. Mm-hmm. And we also learn that Daemon and Mysaria are not really on great terms with each other anymore.
Right.
Anything else from that scene?
No.
The other thing,
still not loving the scenes between them.
Yeah.
And not sure if they're really going anywhere, but we'll see.
The other thing is Daemon is just super hungover, really hungover. And we'll see more of that later.
The gods are definitely punishing him for his indulgences.
Yes. So Rhaenyra is in her chambers, and Cole comes to the door. Rhaenyra is very excited to see him, but he then announces, "I've got a message from the queen." And then we see sort of that excitement from Rhaenyra's face dip away.
I love the demeanor between the two of them. Feels so real. How uncomfortable he is, how confident she is, the way she waves him over. She's like, come. Which came off to me as blissful unawareness.
Yeah.
That she just has no idea the consequences of their previous night's shenanigans. And like we said, the consequences could be lethal for Cole.
So Rhaenyra meets with the queen, with Alicent. Alicent confronts Rhaenyra fairly aggressively regarding Otto's accusation that she coupled with Daemon in a pleasure house. By the way, great euphemism. I feel like I'm going to use that more often.
Well, and she says it. She uses the F word about.
So
that.
she later says that Rhaenyra's basically like, "What are you talking about?" And Alicent says that you f***ed Daemon in a pleasure house, and we can bleep that out. But I love the explicitness of the way the two of them spoke with each other.
Yeah.
Rhaenyra denies it. She claims that Daemon never touched her, only that they drank and visited a pleasure house to witness a show. And by the way, Rhaenyra swears on the memory of her mother that Daemon never touched her. Lastly, Alicent explains to Rhaenyra something Rhaenyra already knows, but that it would ruin her marriage prospects. It would ruin everything if Rhaenyra were sullied, i.e. if she weren't a virgin when she gets married off.
Not a maiden, Daniel. Come on.
A maiden.
Yeah, there's a couple things in this scene. One, exposition-wise, it gives us that idea. It kind of tells us why it's such a problem, what happened last night, like you just said. And then also, it's kind of hard to watch because as much as Alicent says she's there to help, and I do genuinely believe that because later she defends Rhaenyra to Viserys, saying, "I believe Rhaenyra. Daemon didn't touch her." At the same time, it did feel, like you said, she came off pretty aggressive here, like she's more in the role of queen than friend. And that was hard to watch after that little reunion between them earlier in the episode.
Yeah, and I think it's like unfortunate, right? Because we now see another rift in the relationship because Rhaenyra is lying to Alicent, and can you blame Rhaenyra, right? Like, Rhaenyra has to lie to her.
Yeah.
The other thing too that we see, right, and again we've seen a lot of this though, but just Rhaenyra's duty, right, and how it's just pretty crazy that Rhaenyra's like sex life is so important to the realm, right? Rhaenyra even says, "I am the princess. To question my virtue is an act of treason."
Yeah.
Crazy.
And the way that they're just so flagrantly acknowledging, yeah, if you were a man, this wouldn't be a problem, but you're not. So a lot of these injustices we hear about, now we truly see and experience them from Rhaenyra's perspective, and it does make you mad. You're like, can't everyone just chill?
Yeah, the other thing I liked in this scene was that Rhaenyra also acts so insulted to be accused that she had, slept with her uncle. And she says something like, "What a vile accusation." And Alicent responds, "You Targaryens do have queer customs, and Daemon certainly knows no limit." It's really interesting that, yes, the Targaryens have been incestuous for generations. And it's interesting that Viserys and Rhaenyra, they do seem to, or maybe they've sort of adopted the Westerosi, custom that incest is wrong. And that's interesting. I wonder if that's going to get questioned by them a little more later.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it's that, how much of it is political, because I can't tell if that's the source of the anger or it's that we need to use Rhaenyra and pawn her off in a very strategic way. And if Daemon ruins her, then we won't be able to do that. So I think that's a large source of where they're so angry and disgusted. Alicent, definitely a portion of it is there's the incest angle. I don't know how much of that is on Viserys' mind. It's hard to say.
One other thing I liked about this scene, I just love the way that Rhaenyra, when she pretends to come clean about the evening, she describes it like a modern person would describe a crazy night out. We drank in a tavern, several taverns.
Yeah.
All right, Daemon returns to the throne room again. under very different conditions this time. He's dragged by the king's guard into the throne room. He's dropped onto the floor. Again, Daemon is having the worst hangover and probably now the worst morning of his life. Viserys accuses Daemon of defiling Rhaenyra, which Daemon does not deny and essentially admits to, even though we know that it didn't actually happen. Daemon then asks for Rhaenyra's hand in marriage, which Viserys denies, and then accuses Daemon of not lusting after Rhaenyra, but after the throne. Viserys then decides to execute Daemon. Just kidding. Viserys sends Daemon back to the Vale again.
And stay out.
Stay in your room. And actually do it this time. Don't start another war. Come on.
Yeah, so what does Daemon actually want here? Does he want the Iron Throne?
I don't think so. I really think, and again, even with wanting to marry Rhaenyra, I think he wants to be the right hand of the king. Like, I think he just wants to be next to the throne. I think he wants to be the mad dog working for the king or the queen. That's the impression I keep getting, and I think that's why he thought that there's a chance Viserys will actually give him what he wants. And I did notice in this scene too, when Viserys points out, of course, it's the throne you lust after. What's his name? Daemon looks frustrated. Like he almost rolls his eyes and sighs because he's like, no, like that's not what this is about. At least that was my read.
Yeah. I think he wants to be involved and he wants to be accepted as part of the family. And being part of the family means having legitimate responsibility with them, not sent off in some far off place. And in fact, when Viserys leaves and says, go back home, Daemon answers, "As you wish, brother." Like he's trying to use the word brother as a sort of twist of the knife, as a way of saying, I'm family. And I think that's part of why he can't just come out and say what he really wants, because that would mean being very vulnerable. And I don't think Daemon is one to open up like that and say, I just want you to hug me and tell me you love me, Viserys.
He clearly, he can't be vulnerable and he can't connect with his family, right? He can't connect with Viserys by really being upfront about what he wants. Although he sort of did tell Viserys what he wanted in episode 1, but he did it at a very inopportune time. And now same thing this time. He can't properly connect with Viserys, and he cannot get out of his own way, right? He even says to Viserys, better her first experience be with me than with some whore. Like, why? Why do you need to talk that way, Daemon? Like, there's just, and again, the whole thing of taking her out to a pleasure house and all this stuff is, like, there's better ways you could accomplish this.
And why did he cop to it even though it didn't fully happen? It doesn't matter. Everyone saw what they think they saw. And the act was at least partially committed, and I think he wants Viserys to believe it happened because he thinks that would put Viserys into a corner, and I think get him to be more likely to agree to Daemon's marriage proposal. And it doesn't work out that way, obviously.
Yeah, one other thought on this scene, we just talked about how Daemon has such trouble being vulnerable and like emotionally connecting with Viserys and being honest about what he wants. And again, we sort of see the same thing between him and Rhaenyra, right? That's also why he if he actually has this connection with Rhaenyra, maybe don't bring her to a pleasure house, right? Like,
right. It's the way he was raised. He has trouble. He has trouble expressing himself. He doesn't really know how to interact in the correct way.
Next, we see Viserys and Alicent with each other. Viserys and Alicent are discussing who's lying, Rhaenyra or Daemon. Alicent defends Rhaenyra, insisting that Daemon is more deceitful and that it makes sense that he might lie about this. Viserys asks, how does confessing to such things serve him? And Alicent puts a hand on Viserys' shoulder and says, by reducing you.
Right.
Exactly what we were just talking about before.
I think we already talked about why we think he really admitted to it.
Yeah.
But it was nice to see Alicent sticking up for Rhaenyra. And also, honestly, kind of nice to see Viserys cut through the BS. Even though I'm not on his side, it at least shows some degree of intellect to say, look, I don't know what happened, but I know something happened. And he's not wrong.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, Alicent is just so shrewd. Like, I love seeing her understand this situation. and also having a way to deliver it to Viserys with like tenderness. Like, I love the way she knows this is a hard message to give him, and she does it tenderly. Like, I think it's really impressive. There was another line in this scene I just loved. Like, there's just so many cool, like, everyone says things in cool ways. We've discussed this. Alicent says, "How often does he speak the pure truth?" Referring to Daemon.
Right.
That's a line I'm going to use in the future.
Yeah. You're going to be really annoying to be around with all the things. You're like, I'm going to start saying this from now on.
I would see a smile upon your face once again. Rhaenyra visits Viserys in his chambers. A nervous Cole holds the door open for her. And then Rhaenyra meets with Viserys, and they discuss the Song of Ice and Fire. Of course, it's the prophecy that Viserys had told Rhaenyra about when she was first named heir. Viserys explains the burden of this knowledge is larger than the throne, larger than Rhaenyra, and definitely larger than her desires. He demands that Rhaenyra marry Sir Laenor of House Valyrian. Her time for courtship is over. It's time to unite these two great houses. And Rhaenyra says, okay, I'll do it. But in exchange, you have to get rid of the vulture that hovers over the throne, that hovers over all of us. You have to fire the hand.
And I think, and he, of course, will go on to do that. And I think it's the right decision. But as always, well, actually, maybe it is. I don't know. There is the whole idea of keeping your friends closer than your enemies. But at the same time, he only made the decision after having to go through this emotional experience, after having to be pressured and forced into a corner by his daughter. So I think we're often seeing that on this show. Sometimes you make the right decision for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Why do you think Rhaenyra was willing to agree to this? Like, it almost seemed like she was prepared with her request of, yeah, I'll accept this, and I'm going to ask for the hand to get fired. Like, how was she ready for that?
Yeah, I think two things. I think one, as she learned from Daemon this episode, it may not be as bad as she thought. She can fulfill her duties to the realm by having this politically arranged marriage, but still do whatever she wants. That's part one. I think part two is she's realizing that the slack has run out. She really doesn't have a choice, and she accepts that at this point. I think those two things in combination, she was like, I have to go through with it, but what can I get in return? And she can get her father to do something he should have done a long time ago, in her mind.
I also just love coming back to this prophecy. I know there were some negative feelings around tying this into Game of Thrones and into the what do they call it? Into the White Walkers. But it just feels cool. Like, when they talk about the prophecy, I loved how serious the scene looks and how serious the music is. And it does put everything in such a different light. Like, Rhaenyra is sort of playing around in some scenes here, but it's like there is this heavy, heavy burden on her, or at least on Viserys and theoretically on her. And I feel like you feel it in this scene.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think I don't really think much about the old Game of Thrones series while I'm watching this now. Like, it's so, I think, already come into its own. I'm so invested in these characters that when he says Song of Ice and Fire, I'm not even thinking about season 8. I'm just thinking about, wow, like, this is an incredible burden he's placing on her. And it's also a good point. I'm not saying that Rhaenyra should be as tied down as everyone wants her to be, but there are going to be moments where her desires are a lower priority than what must be done for the realm. Like, that's what comes with being on the Iron Throne if you really want it.
Yeah. And then the last thing I got out of this scene was, like, man, the Targaryen family just seems so weak, right? Viserys explains that we're going to unite these two great houses, and then the House of the Dragon will stand as one for another generation. Like, it's generation by generation now. Like, just what a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Otto visits Viserys in the small council room, and we have an incredibly tense scene. Another scene where I just wrote down a bunch of dialogue, but I think I'll just summarize it, and we can run through the dialogue if we want. Basically, Viserys explains to Otto, I see now that you've risen in station and in power very quickly, that a lot of things that have been bad for me have worked out well for you, and I see now that you're too self-interested, that you put Alicent into my life at a time of great grief for me, and it was good for me, and I knew it was calculated, but I now realize just how calculated it was. And he no longer trusts Otto, and he says, look, we owe you a great debt. You've done a lot for us, but I just can't trust you anymore. You're too biased. I can't have you here anymore. And he strips Otto of his title.
Yeah, takes the little pin off of his shirt. We already talked a bit about what brought Viserys to this decision. So the only thing I'd add from my perspective is I wonder what Otto is going to do next. I imagine move number one is he still has Alicent with Viserys. So does he try to pull Alicent's strings and work through her? We've seen that she's not necessarily willing to go with everything that he says. So that may not work out too well for him. What does he do from there? Well, Daemon's out there. He's not too happy with Viserys. Does he pull a sea snake? Does he approach Daemon? I just feel like Viserys does not know how to cut ties without creating enemies. I think Daemon is a problem, and now I think Otto is a problem. A bigger problem, potentially, than he was before.
I think you're right. I think with Alicent, I think it's going to be like a really big tragedy, right? She's going to be put into a horrible, horrible position, right? She's already been put in tricky positions. I think it's about to get a lot worse for her.
Yeah.
And I'm going to miss Otto's hand. Like he really grew on me. And I just love, we've talked about this before, the way we see the wheels just turning in his head when he's like trying to figure out the right way to phrase something. And we see it in this scene too, as Viserys is talking to him and he's trying to, like, he starts seeing where this conversation is going. I just love the look on his face as those wheels start turning.
Yeah.
All right. And then the final scene, Rhaenyra is in her chambers and the maester comes in with a tea for her from the king. And he explains, it will rid you of any unwanted consequences. And we end the episode on that line.
Right. And another great example of just phrasing things in the most polite way possible. And also, I think, a nice thematic wrap-up to the episode, unwanted consequences. That was a big lesson for Rhaenyra this episode, is that you go out and you have a good time. You want to flagrantly, like Daemon, disregard your duties. Well, you see that it has consequences. Sends everyone into a frenzy. Words like treason get thrown around. People get really pissed off. And things could have been a lot worse. But it's a lesson for the future that, sure, do what you want, but be aware of the consequences.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of very tragic, unwanted consequences from everybody's desires and duties in the rest of the show.
All right, with that, Daniel, I know you've never done a wrap-up before. Well, usually at this point I would ask, Gil, any other thoughts on the episode, anything we didn't already talk about?
No, I don't have any other thoughts. Oh, sorry. Gil, any other thoughts on the episode, anything we didn't talk about?
That's what I was going to say. I feel like we pretty well covered it. Oh, actually, one thing I meant to say this up front, but for those of you who are missing Adam and you want to hear his thoughts, I tracked him down. I shoved an iPhone in his face, and I at least got a few minutes of his time and got some of his high-level thoughts on the show so far and a couple of particular things this episode, including what Daemon is really after. So we can maybe tag that on to the end of this. So don't shut this off yet. We're going to pop up with a little Adam video. You'll get to hear some of his thoughts.
And we're showing a part of it. If you want to see the full video, subscribe to the Patreon.
Yeah, we post a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff to the Patreon, so I got about 10 to 15 minutes with Adam. We're going to put a portion of that video in here. You want to see the rest of it. The uncensored cut, where I give a spoiler about 1899, the new show from the creators of Dark. We got to see the first 2 episodes at the Toronto International Film Festival. I give a little spoiler. It's too hot for public consumption. If you want to hear it, check out the Patreon. What about you, though, Daniel? Any other final thoughts on the episode?
No, look, another great episode, I think. A very different episode from previous ones. And super excited for the next one.
Awesome. Well, in that case, let's do the wrap-up. So if you're watching this and you prefer to listen to us on a podcast while you're walking around or driving or whatever, search Talkin' Targaryen on any podcast app or see the links in the description. If you're listening and you want to see us on YouTube, check out the link in the description. And also, while you're at it, why not leave a rating and a review in the Apple Podcast app? We already mentioned the Patreon. The only thing I'll add is if you want to talk to other one-take people and other fans of House of the Dragon, we have 24/7 conversation going about this show on our Discord. Link also in the description. So with that,
one last, just on the ratings on the podcast app, please, if you haven't given us a rating yet, it's very quick to give us a rating, ideally 5 stars, and it's incredibly helpful, right? Every good rating helps us get more listeners, and if we don't get more listeners, it makes it harder to do this over the long term.
Yeah, it's vital. We're keeping this podcast going the same way Viserys is keeping the Targaryen line going, by the skin of our teeth. I'm in a hotel, some random hotel. I don't even know where I am. Some random hotel where waiters are like, I know you. We're in an Airbnb in Toronto. We're all over the place, barely keeping this thing going. At least you could do.
Have you even noticed how many fingers Gil has left at this point? Come on, we need the help.
Yeah, I'll hold it up. They're all painted green. We forget to edit them out. Anyway, we appreciate your viewership / listenership. And with that, I'm Gil.
I'm Daniel.
Dracarys. Adam, for those of you, for the folks out there that miss you on Talking Targaryen, just quickly, what are your thoughts so far? 4 episodes. You still liking it?
Yes, I do like it. I like that the pacing is really varied.
Yeah.
So you'll have these time jumps, and then you'll have an episode that a lot of stuff happens, a lot of action. Then the most recent episode, a lot of significant things happened, but it didn't feel rushed, and it didn't feel like it was relying on violence to do it, as much as I love violence.
Yeah.
It's definitely like the Game of Thrones bug is getting under my skin again, which is potentially dangerous.
Yeah.
Like I've started re-listening, like in my limited time, like re-listening to the Game of Thrones audiobooks.
Yeah. And normally under your skin means you're getting annoyed, but you mean like you're getting bit by the Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
bug,
like I can feel myself getting invested again.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I'll have my heart broken.
No.
But at least, it's about the journey.
Yeah. What little pieces of your heart remain?
Yeah.
Will be your shattered, broken heart.
Yeah.
That's half ash,
half eaten.
Yeah.
No, but I'm enjoying it. I like the characters are becoming more complex than they seemed originally.
Yeah.
I like that I get to think about I'm reminded of the things I liked about early Game of Thrones, where I can think about the political maneuvering and the mistakes people are making and try to think this is what I would do, or this is how I would solve these problems.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating to watch them make different decisions.
Yeah.
I think Daemon and Rhaenyra should get together, and it would solve both of their issues with the claim to the throne. Mm-hmm. They can just co-inherit it, just like the old days.
Yeah.
And they clearly have they both have some kind of attraction for each other.
Yeah.
So that would solve everything. But of course, nothing can be that simple.
Why do you think Daemon stopped in the middle of their coupling?
I'm not sure. So we know he know he has trouble with impotence.
Right.
So that might be part of it. Maybe things weren't working.
Yeah.
And so he got pissed off or upset at himself, or lost his interest and left. With
so
his tail
Daniel and I talked about this. I said that it may have been physical.
Yeah.
But that could have been brought on by the psychological.
Yeah.
He's overthinking it. I have more to say, but Daniel's gonna be on the pod with me tomorrow. I don't want to give my opinion, or else it's gonna.
I can close my ears.
Yeah, close your ears.
All right.
I noticed that he kind of stops responding to her kisses and everything. So at first she's facing away from him.
Yeah.
From behind. And then when she turns around to make eye contact, he stops.
He remembers who it is.
I think he genuinely loves her, has feelings for her.
I agree with that.
And so then he's like, "What am I doing? We're in the middle of a freaking underground."
I agree, but I don't think it's because he It's because he cares about her that he realizes it's not that the act what they're doing in and of itself is something he would be opposed to. It's that this is not the way.
Yeah. Unlike The Mandalorian.
This isn't how I want to treat this person.
This is not the way.
And so he kind of goes and just drinks and whores his woes away afterward.
That's exactly it.
But yeah.
Yeah, Daniel, you can wake up now.
If he weren't so, you're good. If he weren't so like self-destructive and chaotic
Yeah.
and unwilling to, like he feels a need to be unpredictable.
Yeah.
And if not for those things, the two of them could actually potentially work out. But what he just did was a huge blow to that.
Yeah.
And it just further drove Rhaenyra to, what's the guy's name?
Cole.
Cole, yeah.
Part Dorn. He's not 100% Dornish.
Yeah.
In fact, he fought the Dorn in the Dornish incursions.
Wow, you've been reading up.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's very, and without getting spoiled on anything, somehow like I've like gained the ability to just read the internet without getting spoiled.
You've just gotten good at it?
Yeah, I've just gotten good. Like my eyes will just automatically cross a little if I think I'm getting a spoiler, and it just starts to go blurry.
That's funny. Yeah, this is risky because this whole story is already known.
Yeah, I mean, I will say
I've
there's
been
some
trying to be
stuff
really
I know.
careful.
I know some stuff which I suspect you might already know. I'm not going to say it just in case. Alon was going crazy today, ranting and raving about stuff that pissed him off, which just give me
From the show?
stuff that he knows is coming.
Oh.
It's almost making me nostalgic for Better Call Saul because I loved your
Yeah.
outbursts at
Oh,
the
yeah.
spoilers, and I'm like, we're getting it again. It's fun.
So far, the show hasn't given me a lot of reasons to have outbursts.
Yeah.
Which is saying something.
That's great. All right, but we're gonna have you on the pod again, definitely.
Yes.
soon.
My life will calm down a bit in 9 days.
Yeah, good. Mine too, actually.
At the end of 9 days.
My life's been no walk in the park either. You know? Yeah, I just got back
Mine's
from
been
like,
worse.
a
Mine's been worse.
movie marathon. It was awesome. Yeah, yours has definitely been worse. But I've just been busy. And I have a lot of one-take stuff coming up in October. What happens in October?
Halloween.
That's right.
Ooh,
Spooky. All right.
We show them something really scary.
No, that's right. Yeah, check this out. Anybody who doesn't want to sleep tonight, if you want nightmares, check this out. Look at that visage.
Ah! Hi.
Ugh.